I didn't want to have to make this video, but I decided last year to start doing a once-monthly current events show, and now current events have made it impossible for me to avoid talking about the state of the auto industry by way of the current administration's import tariffs. And yet, talking about this is very necessary, right? Because this is the biggest automotive news story of the year so far. Yet I think there's still some vagueness around what this all means for the auto industry at large, and what it will particularly mean for the consumer. So I'm going to try and do my best to be as fair as possible and tackle this issue from both sides in order to answer just what these tariffs are, investigate their intended benefits, and explore their potential negatives. What will this mean for automakers? What will it mean for you, the consumer? How will this impact the auto industry, not just in the United States, but around the world? We have a lot to talk about, so let's just cut all the preamble short and get to it.
Roman report at the end of the month, and I make what I want when I feel like discussing cars.
So last month, the president announced that a 25% tariff would be applied to imported passenger vehicles such as sedans, SUVs, crossovers, minivans, and cargo vans, and light trucks. The order, from whitehouse.gov, notes that importers of automobiles under the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement will be given the opportunity to certify their U.S. content, and systems will be implemented such that the 25% tariff will only apply to the value of their non-U.S. content. USMCA-compliant automobile parts will remain tariff-free until the Secretary of Commerce, in consultation with U.S. Customs and Border Protection, establishes a process to apply tariffs to their non-U.S. content. Now, the order notes the variety of different reasons why this could be beneficial to the American economy, from strengthening the domestic industrial base to improving its manufacturing industry. However, it's crucial to note that the tariff isn't only on imported vehicles. It will also apply to key automobile parts as well, and I'm talking everything from engines, transmissions, powertrain parts, electrical components. Yes, I'm reading this directly off whitehouse.gov. The stated intention seems to be to decrease dependence on a global supply chain and bring manufacturing back home. Yet the goals also seem to extend beyond this. So let's lay out what those benefits or goals could potentially be. And we're going to do it in good faith, because if I start with the conclusion that it's all simply to make the rich even richer, the duration of this video would be the intro and that last sentence. Now, one of the benefits of imposing tariffs such as these, at least in theory, is to boost the domestic auto industry, as the tariffs would effectively make offerings from foreign automakers too expensive for many Americans to justify, thereby encouraging consumers to buy American. The increase in demand for American-made cars would again, in theory, lead to factory workers keeping their jobs and potentially even allow for enough of a windfall for automakers to create more jobs in the manufacturing sector. And with a stronger chain of domestically manufactured cars, we wouldn't have to rely as much on foreign imports or foreign parts. This would hypothetically dull some of the leverage that countries like Mexico and China have in this regard, and make our trade deficit smaller. Even better, these foreign automakers might choose to build factories here to avoid the import tariffs, resulting in more jobs created and more money being invested into the U.S. economy. In a way, it's a leverage move, getting foreign countries to do things our way by essentially pricing them out of existing here at all if they don't comply. But this approach has come under some pretty big criticism, and to understand why that is, we need to lay out just what a tariff is in the first place. Alright, so what is a tariff? Well, a tariff is essentially a tax on an imported good. Now, how much of a tax? It's pretty much just a percentage of that good's value, with the amount decided by whoever's imposing the tariff. Theoretically, this brings money to the country that imposes the tariff, but not necessarily foreign money, as the ones paying the tariffs are the companies who do the importing. And sure, yeah, charge the corporations. Great. We pay exorbitant taxes, so they should be paying their fair share too, right? Well, of course. But once the corporations do pay the tariffs to U.S. customs upon bringing those imported goods into the country, the corporation is going to decide, well, we need to offset the extra cost we're paying now. The easiest way to do that is to pass the cost down to the consumer in the form of price increases. So prices go up on items that really shouldn't be as expensive as they've become, whether it's electronics, out-of-season fruits and vegetables, and yes, cars. If you break it down further, cars manufactured in the United States will often be comprised of parts manufactured elsewhere, so that a 100% American-made car doesn't really exist, unless we're talking about a concept some guy is building in his garage that runs on Monster Energy and pro wrestler sweat. Ford, General Motors, Stellantis, the American Big Three, they're using foreign parts that would be affected by the tariffs. I mean, the Chevy Bolt is assembled here in the United States, but you want to know how many parts they use that are made domestically? Only about 20%. Domestic automakers are panicking as they try to figure out how they're going to make their cars here while still remaining profitable at a time where not all automakers even are profitable. And the only way to compensate for the increased production costs is to charge more for cars. Research firm S&P Global Mobility assesses that auto production in North America is expected to actually decrease by some 1.28 million cars, with Anderson Economic Group founder Patrick Anderson telling CBS News that, quote, "The latest S&P report confirms what industry insiders and experts like us have been saying for months. This level of tariffs will result in a significant drop in auto sales because the higher prices will directly affect the ability and willingness of consumers to buy cars." End quote. However, despite the anticipated sales drop, the aftermath of the auto tariffs being announced has seen an increase in auto sales. For example, Ford saw a sales increase somewhere between 5 and 10%, while Toyota went from being down 3% to being up almost 8% for the quarter. Honda went from seeing very little movement in the first 2 months of 2025 to suddenly jumping 8% in the last month and increasing 13% from the same time last year. General Motors, meanwhile, is up close to 17% this quarter. Cox Automotive has noted a 30% increase in Kelley Blue Book and Autotrader.com traffic in the days following the announcement of the tariffs, while many individual dealerships nationwide were reporting traffic increases as high as 20% in some cases. This is pretty remarkable growth, right? Well, while it seems like a good thing on the surface, this growth is sort of the equivalent of being encouraged by all the weight you lose when you start starving yourself. Yeah, you're losing weight, but you're not really doing it in a way that's healthy or sustainable. And if you keep it up, you're going to end up in the hospital or in a box in the ground with a eulogy prepared by an older brother who really doesn't do public speaking. And so he just sort of defaults to telling a really embarrassing story about how you got a stiffy riding the coin-operated dragon outside the supermarket one time when you were 26. So yeah, while this appears to be great improvement in the moment, analysts note that a lot of this surge is people abandoning their wait-and-see plans for new car purchases and instead getting what they can while they still can. It's a pre-tariff rush in anticipation of prices skyrocketing. The extent to which prices will increase remains to be seen, as it's kind of early to tell, but the concern is entirely justified, according to economists. Anderson Economic Group predicts a price increase somewhere between $2,500 and $4,500 for smaller models, and an increase of damn near $20,000 on some imported luxury models, while financial analyst Dan Ives with the group Wedbush Securities believes prices on an average car could rise by as much as $5,000 to $10,000 right off rip. A dealer memo from Ford revealed that the company even anticipates price increases as early as this summer if these tariffs remain in place. In the memo, Ford's retail sales unit president Andrew Frick states, quote, "We will not increase the MSRP for any vehicle currently in inventory with our Ford and Lincoln dealers. However, in the absence of material changes to the tariff policy as articulated to date, we anticipate the need to make vehicle pricing adjustments in the future, which is expected to happen with May production." End quote. This seems to be an anticipated consequence of demand increasing while inventory stagnates. However, as noted by CNN, prices may not increase as quickly as you'd think, and that's because even if supplies decrease, the demand is unlikely to be as strong in the months ahead. Why is this the case? It's because people are hurrying to buy a car now before tariff-related price increases go into effect. So that means we probably won't see consumers buying cars throughout the rest of the year at the same volumes, especially with potential price increases further incentivizing consumers to just hold on to the car they have now. Consumer confidence is a measurement not only of how consumers are feeling about the economy now, but how they feel about its outlook. And right now it's not great. As CNN notes, quote, "Today, consumer confidence is at its second lowest point in readings going back to 1952, which is worse than even during the Great Recession in the first decade of this century." End quote. One silver lining, if you want to stretch the term, is that the Associated Press published findings suggesting that import cars could hit an increase of $12,500 over current prices, which could mean that if you own one, your import just became way more valuable. And I don't even mean your 25-year imports like your Altezas and your Laurels and your Stagias. I'm talking your 3 Series, your Golfs and Beetles, basically anything that isn't built here, whether it's made by a foreign automaker or not. Hell, the Jeep Renegade is assembled in Italy, for crying out loud. And ignoring the increase in import values for a minute, it's possible that these tariffs will lead to improved value for used cars across the board, because there's going to be inventory issues, not just with delays on new vehicles as the result of automakers adjusting to a different supply chain, but from people holding on to their cars longer in a desperate attempt to ride out the price increases. You see, the Ford Maverick is built in Mexico, so if you want a Ford Maverick without paying way more than a Ford Maverick is worth, you're going to have to find somebody who already has one here. But then, be prepared for the no lowballers disclaimer for cars that don't really warrant it. Of course, most cars with the no lowballers disclaimer really don't warrant it, right? Now, while not directly related to the tariffs, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that there's also the potential that the EV in your driveway could also become more valuable, since the $7,500 tax credit for EV purchases is reportedly at risk under the current administration, meaning it won't really be as enticing to buy an EV unless you feel the gas savings alone will still leave you coming out ahead. But for people on the fence who were thinking of giving an EV a shot, they'll probably just stick with the devil they know. Now, with that having been said, automakers have seen a big jump in EV sales in the wake of rumors that the tax credit would be going away, coupled with news of the import tariffs. And I'm not just talking about Teslas either. I'm talking about domestic automakers seeing increased sales of their EVs. For example, the Mustang Mach-E saw enough of a sales increase this quarter that the car is now roughly 21% ahead of this same quarter last year. Of course, like the Maverick, the Mach-E is also built in Mexico, so again, that's going to have to change, apparently. Automakers are kind of scrambling right now. As reporter Jack Ewing notes in his article on the tariffs for the New York Times, quote, "The long-term impact of the 25% tariffs is unclear. Many automakers are still trying to figure out how to avoid increasing prices so much that consumers can no longer afford new cars. Investors are pessimistic. Shares of Ford Motor, GM, and Tesla have fallen in the past several days of trading. But car makers have never before had to deal with the imposition of such high tariffs with such little notice." End quote. So prices will increase, but isn't that worth it if it means a bunch of new jobs and investments into the country's automotive infrastructure? Let's take a look. So one positive is that some automakers are actually reversing their intention to cut jobs. General Motors is enacting plans right now to increase light truck production at their plant near Fort Wayne, Indiana. And in January, Nissan had announced buyouts and job cuts at their Tennessee production facilities. But now, they're walking back like a kid who just missed the bus, as Nissan America's chairman stated the company's ultimate goal is to max out capacity at their plant in Smyrna, Tennessee. This means making upwards of 640,000 vehicles per year at that facility, which currently produces around 314,500 cars annually. But that's across 2 shifts of roughly 5,700 workers. The factory would need to add a 3rd shift, and by adding that 3rd shift, the hope is that the facility could hit that 640,000 vehicle number, add a lot of jobs, and increase domestically produced inventory. Another workforce benefit doesn't necessarily involve an automaker directly, but speaks to how the tariffs could potentially create jobs among smaller parts and material suppliers. The owner of the Maryland-based Marlin Steel Wire Products notes that he could potentially double his staff thanks to these tariffs, since they would create an even playing field that didn't exist for his business before. As he explained to the Associated Press, European tariffs and taxes essentially limited his ability to sell his products overseas, since it would cost more for a European consumer to purchase his goods than it would for an American consumer to purchase the European equivalent. The tariffs would, at least theoretically, level that playing field. Considering the company sources all of their steel from Illinois, Michigan, and Tennessee, a boost to his business would probably mean a bellwether of sorts to the US economy having a boost. And yet, it's really not that simple. For every smaller company that could potentially benefit from these tariffs, you'll have a company like Blanc Creatives out of Waynesboro, Virginia, whose owner also spoke to the Associated Press and expressed concern about their ability to increase production if people do start buying American. I mean, I would think if they had more time to prepare, maybe some of these smaller businesses would be able to figure out a way to meet projections. But that's the thing. There just hasn't been enough time between the announcement of these tariffs and their implementation for companies to adjust to the changes. And I don't even think if you'd given them from the beginning of this year to right now that it would have been enough time for significant and sustainable change. And naturally, there's the actual employment effects that are occurring here. While Nissan is maximizing US production, other companies seem to be pulling out altogether. Okay, not pulling out, but at least pausing export to the United States. And yeah, Americans aren't exactly mourning the decision of, say, Jaguar Land Rover and Audi temporarily halting all exports to the United States. Although it kinda sucks that Honda is putting a pause on their plans for the US market-focused Civic hybrid hatchback, you know? I feel like that would have done numbers over here. Similarly, sales on the Polestar 2 and the Volvo S90 have been paused over here. And even if one doesn't particularly care about any of those cars, it suggests that foreign automakers are willing to take the wait-and-see approach, rather than actually going along with the intended goal of the tariffs to bring manufacturing to the United States. For foreign automakers to bring money here, to build factories here, they need to want to play ball. But these tariffs don't appear to be creating the kind of environment to encourage or support cooperation. And while those foreign automakers take their time to get the lay of the land, the US auto industry adjusts to compensate, which means the job effects are hit and miss. For every tale of Nissan looking to add jobs, you have companies like Stellantis who have idled their factories in Canada and Mexico for the time being, which means roughly 900 US workers have lost their jobs. Volvo Group North America also announced plans to lay off between 550 and 800 people across several locations in the United States, including their Mack Trucks facility in Macungie, Pennsylvania, and Volvo Group facilities in Hagerstown, Maryland, and Dublin, Virginia. As a spokesperson for Mack Trucks says in a statement, quote, "Heavy-duty truck orders continue to be negatively affected by market uncertainty about freight rates and demand, possible regulatory changes, and the impact of tariffs. We regret having to take this action, but we need to align production with reduced demand for our vehicles. This is considered an indefinite layoff. We can't say when we'll need to increase production as it depends on the market, but we look forward to calling people back as soon as that's necessary." End quote. Now, you would think this means automotive workers everywhere would be against the tariffs, but that hasn't really been the case here. United Auto Workers President Shawn Fain came out in support of the tariffs, applauding the administration for, quote, "stepping up to end the free trade disaster that has devastated working-class communities for decades," end quote. But Michigan auto workers criticized the policy, noting that the uncertainty and disruption of these fluctuating trade policies could result in significant hardship for workers in the state, particularly since there will also be a 25% tariff on aluminum and steel, which could further affect affordability and result in further layoffs in the sector. It's to the point where Governor Gretchen Whitmer lobbied for an exemption for cars, since an advisory firm based out of Detroit now anticipates around 1.8 million fewer car sales this year after the temporary surge subsides. Naturally, there are also concerns about the ability of automakers to transition to majority domestic production in a reasonable time frame. As the New York Times reports, quote, "Many modern assembly lines are able to produce several models, giving companies flexibility to shift to the most profitable vehicles and to abandon vehicles that don't make as much money. Mercedes-Benz has said it will take advantage of flexible assembly lines at its factory in Alabama. This strategy comes with downsides. It may be harder for car buyers to find moderately priced new cars. Already, the average price of a new car is almost $50,000. Analysts say this much is clear. Tariffs will not prompt companies to open new factories or reopen closed plants right away. Companies won't take that expensive step until they are sure that the tariffs are permanent and that investing hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in new production capacity will pay off." End quote. For what it's worth, some companies were already in the process of moving production here a year ago. For example, German auto parts manufacturer ZF already invested $500 million in 2024 on expanding operations in South Carolina, while South Korean company LG Energy Solution teamed up with General Motors to open up 2 new electric vehicle battery factories in the United States. So some of these job increases can't even necessarily be credited to the tariffs. And it's good that they got in when they did, since May 3rd is right around the corner, and that's when the auto parts tariffs go into effect. And in the interest of looking at the benefits, you could argue that this will, again, increase reliance on goods produced in the United States. Parts made with U.S. steel, sourced from the heartland, the flyover states, and, Pittsburgh. And in an attempt to meet increased demand, new jobs will be created to sustain the required infrastructure changes to meet these new production volume goals. But the negative here is that there are just some things we can't really make here 100%. Whether it's the microchips that will often use raw materials from Japan or Mexico, or batteries which use raw materials from sources like China, which supply the lithium and graphite. This is without getting into transmission parts, powertrains, different modules, and stuff like interior trims. As Dan Ives told NBC News in March, the percentage of auto parts sourced from overseas is in the neighborhood of 40%. So not only will aftermarket parts presumably cost more if you want to modify your car or need a replacement part for a car the domestic automaker no longer produces, it's possibly going to be more expensive just to make repairs. If the part supplier has to pay a tariff, that cost is passed down to your mechanic, who will likely pass it on to you when they have to order a part while repairing your car. Basically, domestic part suppliers and body shops rely on the global supply chain, but now they're facing increased costs as a result of an inflexible edict, since, as the president told reporters upon signing the order, quote, "This is permanent," end quote. Which is why the president is considering pausing the tariffs. The idea is to give automakers more time to move production out of Canada and Mexico and into US facilities. But this isn't exactly easy, since one would assume that there's a finite amount of space in which to move operations, so that you can't really just relocate all of that production to American factories without taking a hit to volume in addition to costs, because there's going to be manufacturing delays. The logistics are daunting. Honestly, I'd have to think by the time the majority of these facilities would be up and running, another administration could potentially be in office, or a different party could control Congress. Maybe aliens invade and decide this isn't a place worth occupying, but it also isn't a place that can be allowed to continue unchecked, and we all get vaporized from orbit. Who the hell knows? The conditions required for these tariffs to succeed seem entirely incompatible with the reality of where we are and how these corporations operate, even if they want to comply. So, on the subject of Congress, how is this happening? Aren't they usually the ones who make the decisions about tariffs and taxes? According to the Constitution, yes. Congress is the one to make the call on whether or not tariffs are imposed. But the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, particularly Section 232 of that law, granted the president authority to impose tariffs on imports if those imports are considered to be a threat to national security. And I guess, in a roundabout way, you can make the argument that this is justified. I mean, I did a whole video about how your car is spying on you through various tech features installed in your car from factory. So you could make the argument that foreign automakers having access to information on millions of Americans is a national security risk, in the same way TikTok nominally is. But then plenty of companies, both foreign and domestic, have access to your information, and nobody really does anything about it. I'm not saying it's right, only that these laws seem to be selectively enforced. Because what is the law if not a cudgel shaped to fit the skull of whomever it's intended to bash? But even if we ignore the national security implications, the Trade Act of 1974, Section 301, grants the president authority to impose tariffs in retaliation against unfair trade practices by foreign governments. I'm mostly just paraphrasing it here, but it seems like this is the sort of thing that could be used to justify reciprocal tariffs against countries imposing tariffs on us that the administration deems to be unfairly levied. So there's some legal precedent for this happening, even if I don't agree with any of it. And there's the rub. The thing I've been trying to avoid doing the entire video. Unsuccessfully, I might add. But it's hard not to editorialize about something like this. So I'll close out the video with what I think. And yes, this probably could have been a much longer video, but this is still a developing story, so I might do a follow-up in the weeks or months ahead. But for now, I'll simply say, in the politest way possible, that I don't agree with these tariffs. I don't think they're a good thing. The idea seems to be that by bringing development and production here, it'll bring jobs and money. People will buy American again. But the thing is, this sort of requires cooperation rather than strong-arming. You want other countries to want to invest in America, not encourage malicious compliance, where they invest in the country but ram us with their own tariffs to where the average American is priced out of simply existing. While these tariffs might bring revenue into the country, it seems to me that it's just going to come at the expense of the people least equipped to weather the hardships these changes incur. Small business owners, auto workers, consumers, people whose wallets and retirement plans are already taking the kind of pounding you typically use incognito mode to watch. These tariffs have the potential to not only cost people jobs, but price people out of car ownership and potentially even price them out of car enthusiasm altogether. And I don't say any of this to fearmonger, but simply to explain why I'm nervous about all of this. Not just for myself, but for the people I care about, and even for the people I don't, because I'm generally not a fan of people struggling unnecessarily, irrespective of whether or not we agree on everything. Of course, many would say, this is necessary, because anything worth doing is going to be a struggle, and lasting change for the better can only occur through hardship. After all, things have to get harder before they can get better. Like Listerine burning your mouth from the inside, the pain is how you know it's working. But won't you feel so much better once you spit? The thing is, I just have a hard time believing that enough of these companies are going to go along with this to make the spit worth the burn. And even if they do go along with it, rather than just pulling their money en masse, which I'm not even sure would make economic sense for them to do, the reality is that it will take considerable time for these companies to cooperate with these tariffs. Moving production from one country to another is expensive even when there aren't enormous bodies of water separating countries. Canada to the US is expensive. Mexico to the US is expensive. So even in the hypothetical scenario in which we have infinite space on which to build these new factories, and these companies have infinite money with which to purchase the land to build these new factories, or the government grants subsidies for these companies to build these new factories, or even in the hypothetical scenario in which the factories already exist and no new facilities need to be built at all, it's still going to take a lot of time because it's a matter of logistics. It takes time to move things, to set things up, to plan out, to budget, to reduce, to downsize, to scale, to supply, to resupply, to acclimate to new production goals, initiatives, and processes, to hire, train, promote, to implement. And in the meantime, prices get higher and supply chains are disrupted, leading to delays in vehicles being manufactured and making it to the consumers who actually are willing to pay the increased prices. Even with the president putting a 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs and the European Commission delaying their own counter tariffs until July 14th, economists predict that the probability of a recession in the next 12 months has now jumped from 25% to 45%. The forecast is looking grim, even if you hold true to the principle that you don't deserve the sunshine if you're water soluble. But I think people should be able to afford to live comfortably and without fear, rather than having the ladder pulled up by people who already got theirs. And hey, maybe there's some 4D chess to this that I'm not seeing, and if so, I will prepare, cook, and serve the crow myself, because I desperately want this video to age poorly. And that's a thing that I don't think a lot of people realize, just how badly those in a state of dreading want to be wrong. Because being wrong is more important than being right. People in a state of dread, that they want to discover that their fears were unfounded, their concerns were unnecessary, and the future is brighter than they thought. I'd like to think I'm an optimist, and yet I don't have a whole lot of optimism when it comes to these tariffs. But I'm holding on to the hope that I'll be gifted with the blessing of wrongness. Because at the end of the day, my favorite movie is The Godfather, and I still live by its first 4 words. But what do you think? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. I really do, because I really am trying my best to understand all the myriad perspectives, whether or not they align with my own, and I'm doing my best to sort of approach it with empathy, understanding, and respect. I want this to be a place where people can learn and share conflicting viewpoints and maybe educate each other through differences and come to a sort of understanding. And maybe that's a pie-in-the-sky thought, but I mean, it is my hope, you know? So please, let me know what you think. If you liked this video or found it helpful, please leave a like, a comment, share the video, or even subscribe. And be sure to tap the bell icon so you're notified for every new video. But if you'd like to support us in the biggest way possible, consider joining our Patreon, where you can get videos just like this before everyone else, along with exclusive content that will never be shared here. Just $1 gets you so much more and helps this channel to continue to provide the absolute best automotive content we can give you. Lastly, for every new order placed on our merch site linked in the description or in the product shelf below the video, I'll send you a personalized thank you video. Thank you so much for your time, your attention, and your viewership. I hope to continue to earn it. Have a wonderful rest of your week.